buck stops here this evening. Our newsmaker is one of the biggest names in the digital world. He was born in India, grew up the son of an Air Force officer and a mathematician mother. And then, of course, like so many other Indians, went to study abroad. One thing led to the other, and then Nikesh Arora became somebody to be taken very seriously in Google as the Senior Vice President and the Chief Business Officer. He's our newsmaker tonight. Nikesh, pleasure to have you on the program. Let me start by asking you something that strikes me while introducing you as Senior Vice President and Chief Business Officer Google. Yes. When you think about the fact that Google started off as a company where the founding or the founder's letter was a kind of alternative challenge to tradition. Yes. And it was all about not being too corporate. It was actually all about being the alternative hierarchy. Where does that reconcile with being Chief Business Officer? Because that's a hell of a corporate term.
You know what, it's actually funny, we debated what should one call oneself, and we've been through all sorts of funny titles, you know, like the guy who takes care of the money or the guy who brings the bacon home. Eventually decided for some corporate title. Because
were you ever called the guy who
brings the bacon home? Yeah. No, not yet, but we actually debated that for a few minutes, but we thought we will settle for Chief Business Officer. But going back to your earlier comment, the founder's letter was very inspiring. That's why I ended up working at Google, because I thought I had it with corporate life. I was done. I didn't want to work for a traditional business. But when I read the founder's letter, it actually inspired me, because it's not about an alternate hierarchy as much as it is about doing things different, as well as not doing things just for the heck of it. And seems to have worked so far.
But as Google expands, is there a danger that somewhere that original dream will get lost? Because, you know, anti-establishment eventually becomes establishment. The boys in the garage eventually become the corporate czars. As true for you as for, you know, Page and Britton.
Eventually is a very long time. Eventually we will all
10 years,
end up
5
in
years.
dust,
eventually
right?
we're all dead.
Exactly. So somewhere between now and eventually things will happen. Look, we worry about that every day. We try and make sure that we try and, you know, I think it starts from the people we hire. We spend a lot of time trying to understand who you hire, because we believe people make the company. It's not our products, it's not our brand, it is people. So we spend a lot of time checking people and figuring out who the right people to work at the company are. And we're constantly challenging tradition, whether it is being disruptive in any space that we're in, whether it's being disruptive in our management practices. We do silly things, you know.
What's the silliest thing you've done recently?
The silliest thing we did recently was, you know, we launched Google+. In fact, last week we all changed our pictures and had scary Halloween pictures of all of our management. The first thing we did, we launched a new product called the Creative Kit, and we all went and doctored our pictures, and we all look like Frankenstein monsters. That's pretty radical for a large company if you know, people have titles like which are long and scary. We also, you know, there was most recently when we launched Google+, it was a different code name internally, which had to do with the oceans and the seas. So we brought in a surf machine that makes real surf.
Are you serious?
Yes, and we brought it on campus, and people showed up in their shorts and they were surfing in the middle of our campus. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
It is.
That is crazy. What does that crazy do for you guys?
I think crazy inspires people. I think crazy tells people not to take life too seriously. I think crazy also tells all of us that it's okay to think different. Because the risk we have is that, you know, we always make we always have this conversation internally. When we try and give somebody something to do, we always want to see if that person has a passion for it. So we will try and make sure that we don't give people jobs just because they're getting sort of more senior or they need more responsibility. We'll try and find the person who has the passion, because we found that if somebody doesn't have the passion, they pretty much end up not doing a good job of it.
Is it really serious and true that you guys once hired somebody who was the world knitting champ?
Yes, we did.
And why did she or he qualify to work at Google? Because they were great at knitting?
No, that's what we try and do is we're trying to look for people who have natural smarts. So we want people who are naturally raw smart, naturally curious. And you can do that by looking at people's grades. You at least get, you know, you make sure you don't get a false negative, sorry, you don't get a false positive. You can get a false negative once in a while. But we try and make sure people have raw smarts. But then we're looking for somebody who is going to have passion. And very often people who are very good at one thing have had to make sacrifices in their life. People who are great athletes, people who are great swimmers, people who are great golf players, people who are great tennis players, they've had to not go out party, they've had to wake up at 5 in the morning, they've had to make sacrifices because they know how it takes to pursue their dream. And it doesn't matter if your dream is knitting or if your dream is, you know, to win the Olympic gold medal. We've got a figure skater, Olympic gold figure skater who ran our business in Finland for the longest time.
What was your passion before you joined, and what do you think was the passion that was recognized when you did your famous interview at the museum in London? What do you think they saw in you? What was that passion?
I don't know, you're going to have to ask them, but...
what were you passionate about?
I like to get things done right.
But that's generally true for many jobs.
Yes, okay, well hopefully they recognize some part of that. You know, I read a lot, I play a lot of golf, I play a lot of tennis, like to spend a lot of time out doing something fun. Sorry?
You once called something quite interesting the airport test.
Yes.
That Google employees usually have to pass the airport test.
Yes.
What's the airport test? I spent a hell of a lot of time in airports, so do you. What's the airport test?
See, that's a very important test. Have you ever walked into an airport, seen an empty chair, or walked into a plane and see somebody sitting there and you've got to sit next to that person, and you make that split-second decision if you're going to end up wanting to talk to that person for the next 8 hours.
Or cover your blanket and pretend that you're sleeping.
Exactly.
Or ask the hostess if there's another seat at the back with no one sitting next to you.
That's the airport test. If you get stuck in an airport with an employee, do you actually want to enjoy those 3 hours or 5 hours, have a great conversation, or are you going to be hiding under the blanket? And if you believe when you meet somebody you're going to hide under the blanket, it's best not to hire them.
And do you think you passed the airport test?
I don't know. Find out.
No, but seriously.
You can tell me after this hour is over.
No, seriously. Is it that Google is looking for individualism above everything else?
Individualism. You can
Eccentricity?
say that. You can say that. We're looking for people whose passion has not been blunted, who have not sort of stopped doing things, stopped being naturally curious. We're looking for people who still have it in them to go out and do something different, be naturally curious, go build something, disrupt something, think big. So for all those reasons, you know, we want people who are still uncluttered in their head.
Are you?
I hope so.
How do you handle disparate identities? You're back here in Delhi. Your parents live here on the outskirts in Gurgaon. But perhaps for all practical purposes, would you call yourself an American?
That's a long debate, right? So in terms of what is your nationality.
But do you have an intuitive thing? Do you grapple with multiple identities?
I don't know there's multiple identities. I think part of it is being adaptive to different cultures. I think you know, my father's in the Air Force, so every few years we pack our bags and move to a different city, which can be quite harrowing for a young kid. You lose your friends, you got to make new friends. You've got to understand how a new school works. You got to understand the dynamics. So
how often did you move around when you were?
Well, I want to say every 3-4 years. I must have been to 6 or 7 schools in 12 years. Not because I was thrown out of the school, but my dad moved. But sometimes you get that too. And when you do that, you suddenly realize you have to be adaptive to every culture that you go into. So, you know, part of my professional life I've spent working in different parts of Europe. I've been working in the US and different parts of Asia. So one is adaptive. One adapts to the culture. One finds the things that you enjoy over there, and you.
But you know, you grew up in Delhi. Among the schools you study at is the Air Force School. You go on to Banaras Hindu University, and then the world opens up, right? But you keep coming back. You've even been back to BHU and so on. I'm just wondering how important the roots in India are for you personally, for your family. Does it impact how you want to bring up children? You know?
Oh, totally. I think you know, the fact that I'm back here is because I'm an Indophile, right? I like everything in this country. I like it for all its goods and all its not so goods. So I'm back here. I love what happens over here. I obviously have a soft spot in my heart for this country and everything that happens here.
Do you feel Indian?
I think so. And sometimes I feel I'm more Indian than many people I run into over here.
And if I said, do you feel American?
I think a part of me does, yes. I think from a professional culture perspective, yes. I think I haven't worked here as long as I've worked over there. So professionally, I feel that I work in that culture, I understand that culture. Personally, I feel I'm more connected to this country.
Many people of your generation, and we're the same generation, a lot of my friends who went away, worked on Wall Street, you know, they packed their bags up and they came back home at some point. What do you think explains that trend? Because right now, the India story is not sounding as great as it used to sound, maybe 3 years ago.
And the American story is sounding good.
I was coming to that. That's sounding pretty bad.
I preempted your question.
You did?
Yes. I mean, I don't know, but when I was growing up, I don't remember for the first 20 years of my life worrying about the economy and worrying about what's happening in the country and whether I should live here or not live here. So, you know, you make do with what happens, and it doesn't matter what the story looks like. It depends on what you want to create your story to be.
But how do you react and understand this sort of global disenchantment with the conventional model of capitalism. Some people have said it's not...
Wait, those are three very big words. Global disenchantment with the conventional...
You want to Google them?
No, I think I understand what they mean, but global disenchantment with conventional capitalism.
There seems to be, in India for example, huge debate about corporate ethics unfolding right now. Occupy Wall Street going on in New York every day, resonance in Europe, you've got countries that may go under. Some people are saying this is disillusionment with crony capitalism, not with capitalism. But I'm just wondering...
It's not disillusion with any kind of crony behavior, whether it's in capitalism or not.
Absolutely. Right? But I'm just wondering, does this impact Google at all? Does this impact your life? You've been in the finance sector, you've seen that side of it. You know, you're in business. I mean, you may be in a very creative business, but you're in business in the end. Is this a tough time to be in America?
Oh, there's a lot of different questions in there, right? I mean, let's start at the beginning, right? I think the more fundamental thing, if you look at what's going on in the world, right, we're all getting connected. Our access to information is phenomenal. If you go back in history, information was power. People who had information hoarded it, people who had information were more important than the others. So what you're seeing is a liberation of information. I'm coming to your point, right? Liberation of information from the fact that I call this a new form of social activism. The fact that we're all connected to the web, we can, sort of have flash gatherings. Occupy Wall Street is done by Twitter and Facebook and Google, right? You get there, or all the uprisings you see in the Arab Spring have all happened because of social activism caused by access to information. Are you telling me that it was perfect in any era before us and everything was fine? No, we just didn't know about it. And when a lot of people got together, they changed it. So I think the good news in this is that if there are problems that are there in our society or in capitalism, they're going to get fixed because people are getting more and more aware of them and they're organizing to fix it, which is a good thing. I saw this interesting movie on my flight over here. I don't know if you've seen The Midnight in Paris.
Yeah, Woody Allen, right?
Exactly, and I sort of went out and said, if there was an era you could live in, what era would it be? So a lot of people responded back to me and telling me when it would be on Google Plus and on various social networking platforms. People came back, and it's funny, very few people want to be in the era we're in.
That's what I was saying. That's why I called it global disenchantment, not such a big word.
My point is, I think that
why are we all feeling so cynical right now?
Well, my point is, it all depends on your mindset. You could be disenchanted if you were in a different era because you could tell me all the things that didn't work at that point in time. Or you could say this is a phenomenal opportunity, people are gathering together, try and fix it. I'd much rather be the optimist.
Fair enough. Talking about disruptive technology, which in a sense is what the internet was and is to begin with, what is Julian Assange to you? Is he an example of the creative force and the complete freedom that comes with the internet, or is he a dangerous guy?
Ooh, I think we're confusing too many metaphors, right? I mean, the internet is purely a platform. Now, you're going to tell me the fact that we have roads, does that mean people can get from one place to the other and organize it?
Yeah, I get that. You can do whatever you want to with technology.
You can do good things, you can do bad things.
So what is he to you?
Well, I don't know. I don't see him as typifying of anything. All that has happened is as a consequence of what he's done. A lot of information which is out there has become more public. People have access to more information. It goes back to my earlier point. Now, it depends on how we choose to use the information. If you choose to use it to fix something, choose to use it for the good, great. If you choose it in a bad way, it's a bad thing.
But the world is grappling with these questions, and the internet, as we understood it, was an area which you could not actually police in any way. Now you come to, let's say, what happened in Norway, where what we used to dismiss as just mere random hate rantings on the net actually had to be taken very seriously. In India, for example, some people react very seriously to what's written about them on the net. Some people say, it's on the net, leave it. What would your response be?
I think people react very interestingly to things that you would say about them or you would write about them. It doesn't have to be on the net. I mean,
but the net does promote a certain kind of narcissist self-obsession, doesn't it? Google does particularly. Does it?
Narcissistic self-obsession.
No, this interview is not about you laughing at my big words.
No, I love these big words. It's all very good. I just you've decided you're going to pick on the internet and that's the bane of our problems.
No, I'm not. I'm asking you a serious question. How do we deal with hate and abuse on the internet when the conventional understanding is the internet works because there are no rules?
No, I think, look, I go back to the fundamental notion. The internet is a reflection of society. The only difference is it is more transparent now than it used to be. All the problems you're talking about existed before, we just didn't know about them.
Agreed.
Now you know about them. Now, the fact that we know about them, we're actually doing something about them. Earlier we didn't know about them. Same thing with the television. You didn't know when, I don't know, 100 years ago, you didn't know if there was an earthquake somewhere. You found out because a carrier pigeon came by and you just happened to the mail guy showed up.
Phantom Comics, it was
something like the mail guy showed up once a month with a letter, and your sister wrote you a letter saying, oh, we had an earthquake last month. Right now you know about it. yesterday. Like you know about it and it gets tweeted or put on a social network in 13 seconds. So people are getting access to information. So
what would you do?
What would I do with what?
What would you do if you didn't work in Google and you Googled something about yourself or somebody sent you a link?
Oh, I Google myself and the first link is not a good link.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Forget it not being good. What if it was just completely outlandish, wacko, complete lie? Like Wikipedia keeps marrying me off, and there's like sometimes it's the same guy, sometimes it's different guys. I used to try and say,
hello, this is all the time?
I don't know, I lost track, I stopped looking. I'll give you an example that's still innocuous. People sometimes find completely libelous, untrue things about themselves, and they're not sure whether they look at internet as a published forum or a kind of informal diary, blog of somebody that they shouldn't feel active seriously.
Well, again, see, it's sort of like depends on what part of the internet, right? So it's
what would you do? That's why I asked you, what would you do?
It's like saying if the front page of the New York Times said that about me, I'd be concerned. Because it's a reputable brand, they've gone and said that something libelous or something inappropriate. If it was found on a scrap of paper,
what's a blog for you? If it's found on a random blog where they said you
goes down
you broke into somebody's house and you stole $1 million.
It goes down the weight and the credibility of the blog, right? If it's a credible blog, if somebody who is claiming to be a credible journalist or somebody is claiming to be somebody who's in the business of producing credible information, I'd want to call that person and challenge them, and most likely, if that person was trying to build a credible brand, they'd take it down. But if it's like the equivalent of somebody writing in a blog of one, is like somebody scribbling on a piece of paper and leaving it for somewhere you can see it. I'm not going to chase everybody who's got something written on a piece of paper.
Fair enough.
It just happens to be written on the internet now.
How do you respond to anonymity online? You're on Twitter. So many people have completely wacko handles. They don't tweet as themselves. Right. As a principle, what do you think of anonymity online?
Look, the world will only know as much about you as you want them to know.
So you think that's okay? You don't think that's kind of dysfunctional?
What would you like it to be? Would you like them to know everything about you?
No, I'd like to know who I'm talking to. I think that because I'm on Twitter and Google Plus, and sometimes there is that whole. Or even if somebody writes me an email, and if they write them as themselves, I feel much more comfortable responding than if they make up some gobbledygook identity. Isn't that normal, natural?
No, that's
I don't know what's normal, but isn't that
yeah, natural? Of course, that's fair. But then it's your choice. You can choose to respond to the ones with the gobbledygook identities, or you can choose to respond to people who have real names. I'm presuming you would know that that's a real name. Look, I think again, it's back to the notion of, like you said, the notion of anonymity. So if I represent myself as me, and I ask you a question, you're more likely to answer it as opposed to if I'm somebody who you don't recognize. Both will happen. It again depends on your choice. Which one do you want to interact with? How you want to deal with it?
Tell me, since you're back in India, does the India story seem different to you? A, at a sort of just the India story level, and B, as personally, as you said, you grew up the son of an Air Force officer, middle class home, where a premium was placed in those days. We grew up on the cusp of liberalization on education more than anything else. Suddenly you have all of our institutes, the great institutes, even the IITs being debated. You have people like Narayan Murthy sort of saying, maybe our brightest students don't get the best faculty that they should have. I'm just wondering how you're looking at India today with all of these debates going on here.
Look, it sort of goes back to our conversation about the golden era and what you can do about it.
Yeah.
Is India better off than it was 20 years ago? I'm sure.
Yeah.
I just came down 30 miles, and you couldn't probably come down 30 miles as quickly as I did, despite all the traffic 20 years ago. So there are things that have improved. Are there things that we could fix more? Yes, we can. And the fundamental challenge I think India has is continuing to invest in the infrastructure that is required to maintain an over 1 billion people. And I think that's where the struggle is. And that's something we need to work at as a society, as the government, as the private sort of the public sector and the private sector. And if you fix a lot of the infrastructure stuff, a lot of those things will go away. Whether it's in education, whether it's in transportation, whether it's in roads, whether it's in any kind of infrastructure, you name it. I think there is a bit of a challenge in this country where we're not able to get our infrastructure up and running to support the population we have. And that I think if you fix that, it applies to almost every field that you're talking about.
Speak a little bit about the years that formed you educationally here. Time was when people would send their kids abroad till after graduation. I mean, that was a curve that we all followed. You did school, you did college, and then you went wherever you went.
This was 3 stages of life, right? You study, you work, you marry, you have children, and you die.
But what I want to ask you is, How did those years shape you, and when you compare it to the education you had outside? Because I know in one of your interviews you said that, today you think when your daughter goes to school there's just too much flexibility in the system because we grew up with that rigorous Indian education system. How do you think our system compares? Because you've had both experiences.
Actually, it's interesting. My theory on my child and how this thing impacts them has evolved as I've seen her.
It's changed, do you think?
No, it's not changed. I think it depends on the person, right? Some of us were driven in one way, some of us are driven the other way. So you got to figure out what our passion is. And some people respond better to a more stricter education than other people who respond better to flexible education. So I think it's fair to say, in generalization,
both ideas can work.
Both ideas can work, and the British system or the Indian system is way more rigid or way more strict and forces you to get disciplined. And the American system is perhaps a little more flexible. I think there's an answer for people. There's an answer for people who like this, and an answer for people who like that.
Did you like your school and college here?
I'm glad that they were strict, otherwise I probably wouldn't have ended up getting my degree.
Because you were a vagrant child?
Actually, funny enough, I probably didn't want the strictness over here. When I went to the US, I was so rigorous about what I wanted to do because I wanted to make sure that I didn't disappoint my family, that I probably studied harder over there than I did over here. So it sort of worked out the other way.
Now, the Indian diaspora, in many ways, in the United States of America, has been regarded as a kind of model immigrant community.
Some parts of it, yeah.
Well, largely. I'm just wondering how much of that is changing with, we've seen a whole eruption of a controversy over the Rajaratnam, Rajat Gupta case. All the protagonists in the story, even the Attorney General's office, the prosecutor, are of South Asian origin. Do you think that's changing any perceptions there?
We've got to be careful. You can't take one or two people and start characterizing an entire population of over a billion people, or more than that in the South Asian sort of region. I think we are model immigrants because, to be fair, we've grown up in a country where many of us have grown up in a constrained resource environment. So actually you learn how to optimize, you learn how to fend for yourself, you learn how to see how you can bring the sort of most out of things and succeed. So I think that kind of behavior is model immigrant behavior.
But did it shake up the community when the Rajat Gupta Rajaratnam controversy erupted, or was it treated as an individual case? Because
it is an individual case. At the same time, would you have preferred it not to happen? Yes, of course you would have preferred it not to happen, but it is an individual case. You can't make such a big deal out of it that you suddenly say, oh my God, everybody who looks like them or is of the same color has the same problem. No, you wish it hadn't happened, but it's an individual case, and you move on.
The other big not thing, but book being debated in America right now is, of course, Steve Jobs' biography by Walter Isaacson. I'm 3/4 through it, but not very flattering about Google. Does that bother you guys? Remember, you've seen the press, you've seen the tweets, you've seen the Android described as a grand theft. And Steve Jobs saying, if there's one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get these guys.
Look, Steve Jobs was a genius, right? Unequivocally. Our founders have learned a lot from him. Many people I know who know him well think he was a genius, and he has been. Look at what he's been able to do. You can go be successful once. There are many people who've done one thing great once. He's gone and done it multiple times, and it is his personality and his passion and his ability to sort of think ahead and spot trends that has made him do that. I think that's great.
But that doesn't answer my question. I mean, you've seen all the press. Steve Jobs right now, especially because of the tragic way and the stage in which he died, people are emotional about him. Everybody's hanging on to every word he's saying, and he's saying Google stole my idea.
Look, I think from my perspective, as I said, Steve was a genius. He did great things for Apple. He did great things for the tech industry. I think they did great things with Silicon Valley and the whole idea of entrepreneurship. So I think it is best not to debate past that. I don't want to debate what he said in the book and what was said. I haven't read the book, but I think we should remember him as a great man for what he did for all of us and for technology, and leave it there.
Tell me this, that you're always asked, what's the next big thing? And you say it's going to come not from another rival, it's going to come from those two boys in a garage.
But look at that. Look, when Google came from a garage with two boys and was the next big thing. It came from some other garage in Palo Alto, which is now a social network. The next thing, which was Twitter, came from another two guys from somewhere else. It didn't come from any large company. I mean, the only large company just come out with cool stuff so far in the last 10 or 11 years has probably been Apple or Google or some stuff. So yes, some stuff does come from companies like Google or Apple, but a majority of stuff comes from garages and two guys or one guy or some smart people somewhere.
But what do you think? Can you anticipate at all which direction that next big idea is moving towards? Because, we are all soon going to be using one form of a smartphone or the other. A laptop is going to soon become passé, I guess. You said quite interestingly once that you don't actually believe in convergence as the future, you believe in divergence as the future.
Yes.
Are you saying we're going to have to carry more than one phone? I already carry 2. How many do you carry?
I carry 2.
2?
I'm gotta have the other one just in case the first one goes away.
But divergence could mean different gadgets for different gizmos.
But don't we do that today? I mean, how many devices do you actually rely on today? Way more than you did a few years ago.
Yeah.
Look, I think what is interesting I found is that every last trend sets the foundation for the next one. So if you go back in history, just restricting ourselves to the internet, if you go back and look what happened, people started putting information up on what is called the internet at that point in time. Suddenly there was so much information, you needed a logical way to be able to search through it. So, the web was about information, it was all out there, and suddenly you went out and you had a search engine, became very popular because everybody's out there. I couldn't remember URLs in my head, you couldn't remember things, but now you know if it's on the web, just go to Google or some other search engine and find it. That sort of set that stage. If you think what happened thereafter, is there was so much information, we're all trying to make sense of it, yet almost everybody in that meantime started getting connected to the web. So you almost felt like if there's anybody out there connected, they're on a social network. So your next tendency is to, if I want to think about people, I'm going to go find them on the web somewhere. And the web has become more about people than it has about information, because I just don't want to know that this information is out there, as we debated about, did somebody write something credibly and it's a real name or anonymous name? I think it's becoming more and more important for us to know who the person is on the web. It's about people. I want the recommendation from other people. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to go on. So, and if you think about what's happening is, you're seeing ubiquity around the world, everybody is connected to the web, you are seeing access speeds go up tremendously, you're seeing new devices which are more compact, they're available, you can carry them around, do whatever you want. So I think, my perspective is what's going to happen is all digital information is going to go up there.
Yeah.
I consider what we're doing as digital information as well. I think your industry is going to change tremendously.
I was just going to say that you've actually said that in a few years most media will have to become digital. I'm just wondering if the internet functions on the premise from a user's perspective that everything's for free. I mean, we now have people experimenting with paid content and all the rest of it. As the sales guy, as the guy who brings home the bacon, is that a problem?
Look, since time immemorial, media has been treated either as free or as fully paid for. You've had free newspapers being left in the metro in the UK, or in many countries where they're fully funded by advertising, and you've had exclusive journals where people pay thousands of dollars and there's 1,000 of them printed because that's relevant for those people. I think the internet's going to be the same way. There is still going to be lots of exclusive information which people want to pay for. Then you have a choice. If you make it more broad-based, then you can fund it with advertising. If you restrict access to it, you're going to have to charge for subscription. And every model is being tried out there, right? If you look at many newspapers in the West, they have a subscription model now where they used to be purely for free. So I think the internet is going to take on its own form and it's going to mirror what we do today. The only difference is it provides a phenomenally larger audience.
Doesn't China break all the assumptions though? Because, everybody says the internet demolishes borders, there's no point censoring anything as long as the net exists. China gets around that.
I think it's about information. So we're back to where we started. I think it's about information and people's access to information. And I think information is like water. It will find its own level in every country around the world.
How do you think the world should deal with China? Because at one level you have a superpower, you can't ignore it, you've got to engage with it. On the other level it defies so many, in an information age, and in an age where it's becoming really difficult to control information, it still manages to control information.
I don't know, look, I'm going to give you two answers. One is, we talked about India a lot, we talk about the West, we talk about the US, we talk about China. Everybody comes with their own rules and the way they want to run their country. And we all take it as acceptable. When you live in India, you accept the way we run this country. I'm sure the people in China accept the way the country is run. I'm sure the people in the US accept the way the country is run. So you have to give in to the individuality of the countries. As it relates to how they deal with information, how we deal with information, how the West deals with information, yes, would we like more liberal information access policies? Yes, we would like more liberal information access policies, because that's what we all like in a democracy. That's all all of us like in society. They have a certain way of going about it. That's their choice. And you have to to respect the choice if you want to work in that country.
Do you see the Indian political establishment getting more comfortable with social media since Shashi Tharoor lost his job over Twitter?
See, it's interesting how you're trying to concatenate different things. I think
I'm not.
Generally politicians...
After Shashi, a lot of people became very nervous at first about what they might say. But now I'm finding that a lot of the younger people, and well, not so young also, or, you know, just all kinds, are on there.
Well, you know, any technological innovation goes through its phases, right? First it's the early adopters, people who are into it, and then eventually, you know, their parents get into it, then the 30 to 40-year-olds get into it, then eventually the grandparents have to get into it, because that's the only way they can relate to a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations down. So that trend is going to follow in every part of society. I think there is no getting away from social activism or social involvement using technology. Now you can call that Twitter, you can call that Facebook, you can call that YouTube, you can call that Google, but you saw this happen in the Arab world, you're going to see it happen in every part of the world. There is no reason that somebody has to go to the polls once every 5 years and say, now I represent the views of 1 million people or 5 million people in my constituency, and go there and say, that's what my people want me to do for the next 5 years. Guess what? You can have a Facebook page, a Google Plus page, and ask the question in the morning, and by the evening, 2 million of your 5 million people will tell you what they think.
Absolutely.
And you know what? You may suddenly find out that your constituency has a very different view of life than you have. Then you have to go represent them.
No dispute with that.
The people who represent their constituency are going to stay in power.
It's a super way of getting feedback, information, all the rest of it. But what about those evenings when 2 people are sitting in a room and they're both looking at their Blackberries, their iPhones, whatever, take your pick, their Androids. They're not looking at each other, they're not talking to each other, they're texting, they have, you know, CRI.
We're back to the negative aspects of the internet technology, right?
But these are, come on, I mean, aren't these real questions? Aren't these real questions? Isn't it changing how we relate to people?
But just think about the amount of time we have saved by making life so much more convenient.
I agree with that.
Now I get my news.
I don't know why you think I'm an internet disser.
I think you're a very technically savvy individual. I totally get that part. I think you're highlighting the challenges we have as we get more and more. I understand.
Ourselves better. Yeah.
Look, the pace of life is different, right? The fact that you have airplanes, you can get from one place to the other, you make it trivial to travel. The fact that you have email, now suddenly instead of waiting for a letter written back to you after a week, you expect a response in the next 24 hours. So yes, our pace of life is increasing. I think with it comes a bunch of convenience. Beyond that is personal hygiene and personal morals, right? In terms of, if I'm sitting with you, I'd much rather talk to you than look at my BlackBerry.
That's good to know.
Perhaps you've got to make sure.
Where are your phones right now?
My phones are far away from me right now. They're not here. But yes, I do have that problem sometimes. But you got to be careful. The person sitting across from you may not want to talk to you.
Okay, it's like the airport test, basically.
Exactly.
It's like the airport test.
You have to be so interesting that I have no desire to stare at my BlackBerry.
That is fair. I think those are good standards to meet. Let me ask you in the end, how easy or tough is it to do business in our country?
Look, every country has its own nuances in the way you get business done. There are other countries where it's much more difficult to get business done than India. Actually, you know, there is a reasonably positive attitude towards doing business over here. The country is going gangbusters in terms of the adoption of the internet, people wanting to be net savvy, very, very technologically savvy country. The demographics are right. I think there are more young people in India than anywhere else in the world. So everything's in the right direction. I think the phases of technology that we have seen in the West are going to hit this country faster. I think you'll see a lot of innovation. I think you'll see a lot of interesting ways of utilizing technology given the resource constraints. You know, all the way from your drivers giving you missed calls because that's the best way for them to communicate, or people optimizing, you know, through internet cafes and finding ways of getting stuff done. So we are going to see adoption of technology in this country at a very rapid pace. And as I said, my one plea is that we all collectively do something about the infrastructure.
Yeah, no disagreements there. And how do you also come back for the lassi? You were telling us before we started this interview about this fabulous Pehelwan ki lassi in Banaras.
As one gets older, you got to watch your calories, right?
But what's this lassi story?
Oh no, I went back to Banaras at the end of last year. I went back for a BHU function, and I was just reminiscing that as we drive out of the university, there is this corner where this gentleman, or his name was Pehelwan, there's no other way to call it, and it's like Pehelwan gentleman, I can't call him a bodybuilder, but that was his name, and he had a lassi store. And because I went back and I stopped there, he says, oh, you're from BHU. Not exactly in English, but he said that to me. And he says, here, have a lassi. And then I just cringed when I saw him take a dollop of cream and load it onto a big sort of bowl of lassi would probably be the entire meal for a day in many countries.
Something you still need tactile and not virtual. Nikesh Arora, pleasure talking to you. And that's it. On the buck stops here. On the other side, the rest of the day's news.